This is Aaron Golub, host of the Blind Ambition podcast. We'll be bringing you world-class leaders, entrepreneurs, and athletes, people who have overcome obstacles and used their ambition to create enormous success in their lives. If you enjoy this podcast, if you get anything out of it, the only thing I'll ever ask is that you subscribe, rate, and review. Hope you enjoy.
Cool. Awesome. All right. Hi, everyone. It's your host, Aaron Golub again, and today I'm joined by Shannon Connery. Shannon, thanks so much for being here.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
We've been trying to get this going for a little bit now, and I'm thankful we finally have been able to record.
I know, it's a weird time.
Absolutely. So if you want to just kind of go over what you do and explain that to my listeners a little bit to start.
So I'm a psychologist, and I've had kind of an interesting career trajectory. I started out and I focused on first responders. So I worked with a company and we did all sorts of therapy and trauma work with people on the front lines. So military personnel, cops, firefighters. And so I was really young in my career, and it started with this company when like the Columbine massacre started. So all of a sudden I was sort of thrown into this world of trauma at a level that it was pretty overwhelming, but it really motivated me to get a bunch of training in trauma and doing intense trauma work with people. And I love that kind of work. And then as I got older and had kids, being on call to go do trauma debriefings after a shooting with the department at 3 a.m. just wasn't a reality for me anymore. So I started a private practice. And then unfortunately here in Colorado, we had a second huge shooting trauma at the Aurora movie theater complex. And so I started seeing more civilians. I was still seeing some of my guys in the police departments, but I was seeing more civilians and transitioning into private practice work. And it was really interesting for me to see sort of the difference in mentality and empowerment that people who are first responders have versus sort of kind of, and I'm sure you see this with athletes as well, versus just people living their lives. And so that's kind of been my work. Now I coach, I have a podcast. I still see people for therapy. I'm doing a lot of different things in my life now.
Yeah. What do you think led you in the beginning to be a psychologist? And then also what drew you originally to the trauma work?
So it's funny, psychology. That's a good question. I don't think anyone's ever asked me that. As an undergrad at UC Santa Barbara, I loved it. And I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And I took an abnormal psych class where they talked about all these different fascinating mental issues that people can have, things like schizophrenia. I remember learning about this conversion disorder where people who aren't even pregnant can look pregnant because they believe or they have this desire. And it just fascinated me. And I realized at the end of the semester that I never had to write down notes in psychology. Because it was just so interesting to me. And then when I thought about how to lead a balanced life and be able to have a family, I thought, psychology was one of those jobs I could see being able to do with some balance. So, and then trauma work, I worked at this incredibly intense emergency room and hospital when I was doing my training at Denver Health Medical Center. And I just decided that I really loved the trauma work that came with seeing people who have such difficult lives, people living on the streets. And then from there, was so lucky, got connected to like the biggest trauma guy in Denver and started, just with a company that already had just really neat contracts. I mean, we would fly down to Antarctica we had this contract with the National Science Foundation and do psych evals for people who wanted to winter over in the dark for 8 months a year with, nothing. There's, you're on a base with a few other people. It was just a really cool company. We did all sorts of fun stuff, and I got to train at the police academy, and we just did a variety of things that were really fun.
Is there anything, and you know, if you were not able to talk about certain things, then that's fine as well. But when you were doing work with people, you know, who made that choice to be in Antarctica for that period of time, was there anything that stood out with those types of individuals versus others?
Yeah, the people in Antarctica are really interesting. It's sort of a rare breed of person who wants to do something like that. And for the most part, they would go down
Yeah,
to do the 4 months of the summertime. But then, you know, they have this program with the National Science Foundation down there where you don't pay any bills, no rent, no food, no nothing. So they get a great you know, amount of savings, and then these people typically go travel. So they were kind of the wanderlust right out of college, you know, young folks who wanted to go have a really intense experience and then have piles of money and go travel the world. So it was a really
that's really
interesting
cool.
bunch. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, but I had something, you know, happen in my life that was pretty crazy. You know, like a decade ago that sort of you know, stripped everything away that I had been doing, and that's where I sort of got on the path of doing, you know, the stuff that I'm currently doing. I had sort of my own, you know, I kind of say the bottom fell out for me. So, um,
And touch on that a little more. What caused the, you know, what was the bottom falling out for you? I know that I know a little bit about your story, but I'd love to share that with my listeners.
so, you know, it's interesting. I was married to somebody who had struggled with addiction. And so I really try to be compassionate when I talk about this because so many millions of Americans struggle with addiction. And especially um, now we know how bad these opiate companies were. But I was married to a surgeon. And so we had this very big life. We had, you know, we had fancy homes and a mountain ski home and you know, lots of vacations. Um, and he struggled with relapsing on opiates, and it's a tough thing to talk about because you know, he's still a wonderful person. He's a great father to our children, but he just never really did what was needed to do to stay sober. And I think, you know, for whatever reason, people need to numb and escape, and just the physical addiction that comes with opiates. So, you know, I'm leading this life, mostly a stay at home mom at this point. I was doing some part time work. I'd taken some time off from the really intense schedule I'd kept up when my kids were really little, and went to Disneyland for a vacation. And you know, one day go to the park, we're having a great time. The next day, my ex-husband got this look on his face and just said, you know, I can't go to the park with you today. I have to go give up my medical license and get an attorney. And P.S. I'll be leaving for a rehab that costs $1,000 a day for months and months. You know, there's no money. I've spent it all. There's no, um, you know, it was just like in 1 second, I had what I thought was a real life, and the next second, I realized it was all built on a house of cards, and it wasn't authentic. It wasn't real. And so that really started me going on a whole separate path where I had to regroup and sort of reconfigure everything I thought my life would look like.
And what was your reaction when he said that to you, and you know, sat down outside Disneyland and he gives you that news?
That's a good question because what I realized is that it was obviously so distressing, and I was so filled with like shock. But there was this piece of it where when you live with an addict and you have this fear, and the fear is they're going to use again, and you don't know how
Yeah.
big how much they'll take down. You know, if you live with an alcoholic, like, are they going to go drink and drive and get in a car accident, and everybody gets sued and somebody gets killed or whatever? And for me, um, I would monitor and watch. And so you get to what I call, on a scale of 1 to 10, you get to your 8 or your 9 a lot when you live with somebody with addiction. But
Yeah.
in that moment where we were at Disneyland and he told me that, I really got to my 10, which was a very peaceful place in the respect that I knew I was done. I had this like, okay, I get it. I can't manage that anymore. So for me in that moment, the marriage was done. There was the stress of what am I going to do? Like, how am I going
Yeah.
to take care of these kids? Um, so they were different, but the piece of like, I'm done. That part of it for me, I have to say was it was sort of relieving.
Yeah. And so then what did you do in that moment? You find out that everything's gone,
Yeah.
money's gone,
Yep.
your husband has to go to rehab. What did you do to take those next steps to take care of your kids and move on?
So it's funny, like I just took the next step. It's one of the things I've learned in every moment since then is that really what we have to do to create resiliency in our lives is just show up the next step. And that day, the only thing I could do was take my kids to Disneyland. We were there. I had the tickets. It's not like I was going to solve anything. And so I literally made an excuse for their dad not coming and took my kids' hands and walked through Disneyland in a state of distress. um, it's funny when I first thought of writing a book, I was going to call it, not the happiest place on earth, because the worst place on earth you can be when you've just received news like I had is
Oh
Disneyland. But
gosh.
yeah. So I got through the trip. I got home, and I immediately started working more. I mean, my path out of this was going to be work like you've never worked before. You've got this
Yeah.
degree, you've got this knowledge, you have the ability to be successful, and now it's on you. And that piece was so
Yeah.
empowering because I think so many women in particular, we're given so many mixed messages in the world about what we're supposed to do. And so I had this very advanced degree and all this knowledge and all this skill, but I'd also been given this messaging I was supposed to stay home and be a mom. So, you wrestle with so many things, and there was a lot of clarity with not having the choice anymore to just go, okay, now I'm going to work. And
Yeah.
every minute my kids were in school and every minute that they weren't with me, I was seeing clients. I mean, I would see so many people that at the end of the day, I felt like I couldn't listen anymore. I was like, I could barely like stand up after just sitting in the same place hour after hour. But so the number one thing I did was just work all the time.
Yeah. And I think that people don't understand their capacity or what they can really do until their back really is against the wall. And, it's something that you were able to show, and that's really important.
I agree. I agree. And that really also I hope if people go through hard things, I think everybody does. But the
Yeah.
other key piece for me was to take some time to examine like my values and my goals and what had I been doing. I just had this like, wait a minute, like how did somebody who came from a nice family with a mom and dad, I didn't have any trauma of my own growing up. I had this wonderful degree. Like, how did I end up?
Yeah.
um just in the place I had. What were the messages I had been buying? What had I been, I'd been thinking that the important things in life were things like, oh, marrying a successful man, looking a certain way, being a stay-at-home mom. And none of those were really authentic to who I
Yeah.
was. I was somebody who really loved my work. So I should
Yeah.
never have stopped working in the first place because I loved what I did. And yet messaging, other people saying like, oh, well, he makes plenty of money, so you should stay home with your kids. All that had affected me and had led me to living in this inauthentic way that I think was part of the catalyst to everything falling apart. So the other piece was that I started to study happiness. Here I'd been a psychologist teaching people how to not be traumatized, not be depressed for all these years. And I started to say, like, well, what are you doing? You might not be depressed, but you certainly haven't been living, in a way that creates genuine happiness.
Yeah. And talk a little on that. What are your strategies? What are your unique tools that you are able to teach on and provide to others to help them genuinely, be happier or get over trauma or get to that next level of their life?
So trauma is a separate issue. I use a trauma treatment called
Hmm.
EMDR that's super effective. But in terms of the happiness work, um, after like studying and reading and just doing so much research, I really had discovered that it came down to 4 areas that I tried to start optimizing in my own life. And over time, I sort of developed an acronym called PACE, but it's this tool that I use with people. And I'm now have this online course coming out for anybody who's interested. But the P stands for pleasure, which means that in your life you can't just have work. We're all here. You know, you got to have something you're waiting, for Friday at 5 to do, hobbies, interests, creative pursuits, like that thing that energizes you. For me, for a lot of years, it was scuba diving. Like I was saving money so I could go on my next scuba trip because being in the water was just something. But without pursuing those, your life can start to get a lot like Groundhog Day, where you get up, you do your work, you eat dinner, you do the dishes, you watch some shows, you go to bed. And that
Yeah.
is not that energizing to people. It's what a ton of people do. Um, but that's kind of like, are you living, are you surviving, or are you thriving? And so the accomplishment piece is where I was so off, which is my belief is that everybody needs to have fulfilling accomplishment in their life. And it doesn't have to be paid. There are lots of people who do amazing things as volunteers or moms, but you have to be doing something where in the end of the day or the end of the week, you go, I did that thing that I'm here to do, or
Yep.
I'm getting a degree towards doing that thing, or I'm setting the groundwork, but that, you're trying to accomplish something. And the third part is connection. And I think that seems obvious. Like, of course we want connection. Of course we want friendships and relationships with other people, but having intentionality and finding those people in your life who inspire you and energize you, and setting boundaries with people who don't do that, who are sort of those energy vampires or come up with negative things that keep you from being successful. And that actually takes a lot of work. I was lucky because, when everything scandalous happened, I mean, our story was on CNN. It went national. I had news trucks that followed me for days because the story got sold during sort of a slow news cycle as a surgeon is exposing thousands of people to HIV through needles, and it was such a huge scandal, and so I got to find out who my real friendships, who were my friends, who showed up, who didn't write me off, and who didn't act like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Let me know if I can do anything for you. But then we're sort of gone. So connection is the third piece, and then exercise. And that is just that we are here, and this as an athlete and as somebody whose own story is so
Yeah.
inspirational. That we're wired to move, and that if people,
Yep.
we've developed this sort of modern day way of sitting around and being in our cubicle and then going home and sitting, and it's not good. People, I believe, and the research is pretty clear, do not reach their full empowered potential without moving. And so those are my 4 pieces that I use to help people examine their lives. And I also use it in my own life as a tool, kind of when
Yeah.
you're irritable or you're not feeling great, like what's off. And I can go through those areas and pretty quickly know, like, I've been living in accomplishment. I haven't been doing the
Yep.
stuff that I enjoy. I haven't been seeing my friends, and kind of quickly regrouping. So that was one of the pieces of work that I started to do after, sort of everything fell apart.
Yeah, and I think those areas are really important, and I think that so many people oftentimes are lacking in at least one of them. For example, the exercise piece. People don't understand that to be successful doesn't mean making X amount of money. It doesn't mean having a nice car or a nice home. Like, yes, those can be a factor if you choose them to be a factor, but in my personal opinion, being successful means having successful relationships, being successful at my career, having a successful in my physical fitness, exercising every day, things like that. It's all encompassing, and it doesn't really focus in on one area. And so I think that so many people either neglect the exercise aspect, the connection aspect, whatever it may be, and because of that, they are really missing some area in their life.
Right. Like just balance and also that passion piece, so many of these areas I see people have way too much or they don't have nearly enough. There are people who are
Yeah.
like so bored. And when they come in to see me in my private practice, they often have a problem about somebody else. I'm so mad at my husband. I'm so disappointed in my kids. My husband golfs all the time. And I got to this place in my life where for me, empowerment had to I realized that for me to be empowered, I had to take responsibility for everything. So so when I go out and I do something and I get angry at other people, I'll come home and go, wait, you were angry. What just happened? How did
Yep.
you create that? Um, and then you have the ability to do something empowering. So I used to say the same thing. Like, I'm so disappointed that my husband wants to golf all the time. And one day I went like, why, where's your golf?
Yep.
Why are you resentful that he has something that combines connection with his friends, exercise? He's passionate about it. He has this pleasure. Where's yours? And as
Yep.
soon as I found mine, I wasn't angry at him anymore.
Yep.
And that's what I really want to help people do is like realize that you are responsible for your happiness. You have to get up in the morning and take the time and energy to figure all these pieces out. And once you do, success is kind of the byproduct of that,
Yep.
right?
Yeah. And I think that going off of that, so many people don't consider that within their day-to-day lives. And so, yes, it's important to have something you're passionate about outside of your work, and whether that be playing golf, whether that be scuba diving, whatever it may be. But I think that so many people are in jobs or in careers that they truly just are miserable at. And because of that, it makes the rest of their life miserable. And, for me, I get told all the time, "Oh, I have a terrible work-life balance." Well, in my opinion, I don't really consider it a work-life balance. My work is my life. My life is my work. I love everything I'm doing. Everything in my life is around helping others, making an impact, and that's who I am as a person. That's what my work is about. There's no work-life balance. It just is who I am, and I completely understand that not everyone is able to get that. But I think for me personally, and if others can get to that where they really enjoy what they're doing, it makes them overall their entire life so much happier.
No, I think you just nailed it. I mean, I really think you did because, I mean, the ultimate, when we think about, when we all fantasize about, if you could do anything, if you could have been born with any skill, what would you be? I mean, it's always like these people whose work is pleasure, whose work
Yep.
is connection, whose work does involve some sort of movement, like, being a rock star or
Yep.
being a musician, being a professional athlete, being, the CEO of some corporation that makes a product that gives,
Yep.
back to the world or provides something. It's like all of those things, like those people don't go to work and feel like they're working,
Yeah.
you
But I
know,
think I think so many people are afraid to take that step to say, I want to become a professional musician. I want to be the CEO of some company. I want to do this. And because they never take that first step, they're never going to accomplish that. And I think it starts with having that belief in yourself that you can do something.
Well, and I think what you're tapping into also is fear, which is what
Yep.
kept me. That's what kept me from doing everything. And it's funny because, I mean, in some ways, I'm so grateful that I had this huge tragedy because I don't think I would have been daring if I had stayed in a place where I cared
Yep.
what other people thought, where I was trying to fit in and
Yep.
belong, and I was trying to live according to messaging and shoulds and rules.
Yep.
And because I was lucky enough to have had every fear I've ever had even thought of. I was scared about, will I lose everything?
Yep.
Will people know that my husband is an addict? Will I be found out the secret? And once it's all done and your fears are gone, there's such a freedom in being able to go, okay, well, what do I want to do since now
Yep.
every fear I ever had? And so, in my old life, I never would have done podcasting. I would have
Yep.
been like, oh, what will the other women at school think if I start this podcast? Or what if I fail and nobody
Yep.
listens? And I would have
Yep.
cared. And, so I love that either if what you're saying kind of is if you have a passion, and I think values work is so huge, creating authenticity, creating values, which is what it sounds like you live from, your value to help other people overcome obstacles like you did in your own life. And that's so key, that
Yeah.
getting too comfortable, having fears, worrying about, will it work? All that stuff keeps people really stuck.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you kind of mentioned this, and I just want to go in on it a bit, but that topic of fear, it also relates to, things happening for you and not to you. And like, that situation, as bad as it was, it happened for you to make you understand certain reasons. I talk about this all the time when I do speeches. I'm so thankful that I was born legally blind. It happened for me and not to me, because it allowed me to pave the way for others in sports, business, life, and really meet some really cool and interesting people. And I think that when people can learn to look at their situation as, this is happening for me for a reason, and I'll come out the other side, then just they become so much happier. Their life becomes so much better, and everything just is all right.
I know. And I love that you say that, it's almost like when I think about you becoming a D1 athlete, despite being blind, or me creating this kind of crazy fairy tale life I'm living now, with the success and what I'm doing. But if somebody said to you, Aaron, if you could go back, would you not be blind?
No,
No, see, and that's what
I
I'm,
not a second. And it's because
yeah,
and I wouldn't have used to said that though. When I was
no,
younger, I would never have said that, because I would have said, I can't drive, I can't do this. And then I wouldn't have done it. If I wasn't legally blind, I don't think I would have played college football, or at least at Division I football. I think that being legally blind gave me the drive, gave me the ambition that I have today, and it allowed me to do that. And it's allowed me to set up so many other things within my life. And so, no, I wouldn't trade it for anything.
yeah. I mean, it's so funny. People, especially right after it happened, I just would see this pity on their faces when they're like, "Oh my God, did you know that? Or did you know she was on the news? Did you hear about what happened?" And yeah, no, I go back and I look at that as the biggest gift, because sometimes it has to be something big to shake you up and make you uncomfortable, to give you that drive and that motivation, or that freedom. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah.
That's awesome. Well, just to share with everyone else, what else do you want to leave with kind of our listeners? What advice would you want to give someone who's maybe going through a situation of fear, of anxiety, of, someone who's unhappy, and then, where can everyone find about, you on your social media, your course, everything that's going on in your world?
So I would say a couple things. One is, you cannot underestimate the value of energy. And so many times when people come into me and they say, I want to change my life, I don't have the time. I can always find time in somebody's schedule. I mean, and it's usually as simple as, why don't you get up at 4:30 or 5? Everybody's asleep. No
Yeah.
phone call's going to come and bother you. And what you have to do that is to go to bed earlier and miss a TV show.
Yeah.
And then what comes up is like, I don't have the energy. I can't do that because I don't have the energy. So I would say that so much of success and doing some of these things and feeling self-esteem and empowered has to do with just taking that next step. So if you value success and you don't do anything to create it, that takes
Yeah.
away from your self-esteem. If you value something like health and you get up every day and you make your smoothie and then you go exercise, that increases self-esteem and self-empowerment. So watching your energy really closely. I even have people track in a day. Like, imagine that your energy shows up in the morning as moderate. Like, before your coffee, you're this 4 cups of water, your energy is at the 2-cup mark. Every single thing you do in a day, see if that adds to your energy or depletes from it. And so when people really start to pay attention to that, so for me, like, I can do if I do an 8-mile run, I'm pretty tired. It depletes me for a good part of the day. So I only do that on the weekends. During the weeks, I do 3 to 5 miles, so that then I have really good energy for work. So I would say, with all those things, for people to really watch your energy. If you create values, live according to them in very small ways to build to your self-esteem, and then you can really do anything. And
Yeah.
people can find me. ShannonConnery.com is where I've got all of my old blogs. There's links to my podcast. My podcast is Fix Yourself. It's kind of a controversial thing, but I'm not saying that anybody's broken. I talk about fixing yourself because I really had to fix myself. And I still, every month I'm trying to create greater levels of happiness and inspiration and energy in my life. So, all sorts of free information for people struggling with any sort of psychological issues is on there. On Twitter and Facebook, I'm S. Connery PhD. And then I recently started an Instagram called at the Happiness Gain. So any of those places, I'd love to have people follow me. My course is going to be coming out soon. And that will be on my website. If you want to know when it drops, just sign up for my newsletter, and I will absolutely let people know. There will be an option to work with me. So if you take the online course and you think I'm stuck in one area, I'm really not good with connection, there's totally an option to work with me one-on-one. So that is
Awesome.
it. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being on. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it at all, if you got one thing out of it, we'd really appreciate it if you would subscribe, rate, and review. Thank you.